All right, everybody. I think we are officially live. So I just wanted to say thank you so much for coming out to Startup Boston Week. My name's Amanda Toomey. I'm one of the organizers for the event. On my screen, you'll currently see the sessions that are happening right now. So you'll see our session here. Okay, this is not our session, is it? We're gonna take that off. I'm just gonna. I don't think this is.
Make it rain, but yeah.
Well, okay, so I'm going to go ahead and tell you our session is called To the Left, Centering User Experience in Your Product Roadmap. There is one other session happening. It's a mystery session. I don't think it's going to be as good as this one, so stay here. No, I'm kidding. But if you do want to navigate to that session, on the bottom of your screen, you can just go ahead and click Change Track and navigate over to the other session and jump back and forth. That being said, while we wait for a minute for everybody to navigate around, as a reminder, we love questions, so please use the Q&A tab on the far right of your screen to submit your questions that you might have during the session. That's where we're going to be looking for them, so use the session chat to chat amongst yourselves and the QA tab for your questions, please. And then finally, we have some awesome social media competition floating around. I'm sure you've heard about it by now, but I'm going to repeat it just so that you make sure you get involved. You'll want to pay attention to what our speakers are saying today and then post an awesome quote on social media from them using the hashtag SBW2021. You'll then be entered to win one of $500 gift cards to a Black-owned Boston business. So please make sure to do that. All right, so that's enough of me. With that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to your moderator today, Dominique Aubry.
Nice. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Startup Boston. If this is your first session, welcome. If you've been going to many, then even better, awesome. Love to have you here. And so we're going to be talking about product during this session, and really, product is one of the driving forces of your business and business success. So it's a really important conversation, and the work that people do that in product from a career perspective, from product perspective, is really the critical work. And so we want to spend that time and honor that in this conversation and get into the weeds of what that means. And so I have an amazing panel here today. And so what I'd like to do is introduce them all and then, get into the conversation. We put out a poll, and so it'd be great during this time for you just to let us know, what stage of company are you working at or building, and as well as kind of where you are in your career currently. That will help us really fine-tune this conversation and make it high value for you. So please take a moment and do that. So I'm just going to go through the list of panelists, and if each time I mention the panelists, please say hi, raise their hand, and the little waves, so we'll know who they are. So first I have Ashwini Kedar. She's the lead product manager for Humana Pharmacy, a healthcare and health insurance company. So welcome, Ashwini. We also have, thank you. Sorry, I'm cutting up. I'm looking at my notes as you're talking, so my apologies. And also we have Sylvia Tower, a product manager at Essin Nautical, a global market leading SaaS platform for maritime commerce operations. So super cool stuff.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Sylvia.
We also have Brian Asosa. He is the group product marketing lead at Grammarly, and I'm going to fangirl right now because I use it all the time. And that's an AI writing assistant. So hi, Brian.
Hey, folks.
And last but not least, we have Susan Rice. She's the vice president of user experience at Workiva, which is a global SaaS company. So thank you, Susan. And my name is Dominique Aubry, and I'm your moderator here today. And I run a company called Growth Founders, and we are a startup dev shop and staffing company focused on early stage tech companies. So hope folks have filled out the poll, and so we're going to share that in a moment. And please know that, please put your questions in the Q&A. You also can be in the session and commenting. We'll try to track things there also and answer them as we're having the dialogue and discussion. But we also will have time at the end specifically for Q&A. So again, you can put your questions there. So this is great. So we're looking at companies. So folks here, really it's a wide spread actually with the panelists. I'm like, look, this is kind of a wide spread. So we want to make sure in this conversation that we're hitting upon things that really affect early stage and also growth companies really who are trying to really maintain their kind of market position and grow. So I think those are kind of just two segmented audiences here that we want to be thinking about, because they kind of run on different operational principles and budgetary principles. And so that's really good to know. And as it starts to show up, we're getting more early stages. It's starting to get pushed through. So feel free to fill that out. And then we had a second poll about career. Can you show that as well? What is your area of expertise? So no one's filled that out just yet, but I'm assuming we're all product people here, so we're just going to go with the flow on that, but feel free to also share that as well. I don't know if we published that second poll, but if we do, we can kind of go in on that. Okay, so mostly product and UX, so most of the front and customer discovery folks are here in the room today. Okay, cool. Okay, so we're all talking the same language then. We got this from that perspective. Awesome. Perfect. Okay, so let's just jump right in. And so all of the amazing panelists today, we're going to talk through our experiences, have a discussion. Product can be very serious work and also really fun work. And so we're going to really create a safe and transparent space to talk about the innovation as well as the challenges in building a company and also in product specifically. And so they will share their gems and experience and knowledge through the conversation. So let's just jump right in. So I think the first thing is that, today, everyone talks about providing a great user experience, but the reality is it's like actually really hard, right? And so the question here is like, why is it so hard? And maybe I can just ping on Susan here to kick us off.
Yeah, happy to. Yeah, it is hard, right? It's hard to create those great experiences, and for so many different reasons. There's so much to do, right? You're working in an organization, and there's so many things you want to do across the organization, no matter what size. And so there can be a lot of competing priorities, and figuring out how to juggle all those competing priorities and how do you get everything done that you want to get done, even when you know that there's best practices, even when you know it's really important to lean in and really understand customers first to help really drive what you're building. It still can be easier to sometimes make assumptions so that you're moving quickly and you're trying to get things out the door. So that's like, there's so many challenges when it comes to really creating great experiences. Sometimes it can be also like a focus of the short term over the long term. Even if you know that like, hey, making customers really happy really drives a lot of revenue for the company in the longer term. If you still need to develop something and you need to get something out the door, this quarter, this time, whatever that period is, it's sometimes, again, it's easy to kind of take shortcuts or say that you're going to iterate and then not actually get around to it.
Actually, I'm going to throw a little curveball in that question, Susan, that you can maybe add on to here, which is how do you make that business case? We have folks here that are really early stage startup and people that are further along. How do you bring people back to the value proposition of focusing on the customer at different stages? If you want to answer that, anyone else to throw that in there.
Yeah, well, I mean, I know a lot of people talk about this and it's real. It's like, how do you make the customer front and center in what you do? How do you drive that home for everyone that's in your organization and contributing to that experience? Because it's not UX design that creates the great experience. It's not product management. It's not development. It's like everyone, including customer success, including your sales team, right? Everyone needs to be involved to really be able to create a great end-to-end experience. And so what is the eye? Well, where's everyone's eyes in focusing on what that looks like and what their role is in creating, all of that, all the pieces that ultimately create a seamless journey. So it's like, how do we start with like understanding the customer, getting that empathy for the customer and those pains that are, that we're trying to solve for. So putting them front and center as much as you can and having a shared understanding of that is really critical.
Yeah, no, I think that's spot on. And I mean, to your point of like, where do you start, right? And so for folks here, if you're currently working in product development, you obviously understand the importance of integrating the user journey, more deliberately, with the product development cycle. But actually, like, if that's something that you're trying to push forward in the organization or just increase the touch points and that synergy between divisions and departments, where do you start to create a more customer-focused experience? what would you do first? And I'd love to have Sylvia jump in and share on that.
Yeah, so in terms of how to create, so obviously that's a super loaded question. It's kind of like the sum of all the questions. I think one really important thing to keep in mind is that different, like something that could be a great experience for one customer segment could be a terrible experience for another customer segment. Think of the difference between how boomers, Gen X, Gen Y interact with technology. Gen X wanting obviously a less high touch approach than say the boomers. I think it's as Susan was saying, it's really important to develop user empathy by thinking in terms of when was the last time I had a fantastic user experience, what made that fantastic user experience, and how do I replicate it in the context of my product. And of course, like it might not directly relate, right? So I might like one example is Apple Pay being directly integrated in Uber. How do you translate that to a B2B SaaS platform, which is what I work on? And then you start thinking about like those common elements. Okay, ease of use. I only had to click once or tap once to authorize because the systems were seamlessly integrated, like without me even having to do anything about that. So I think, and then the other thing is, like the user experience depends on the type of problem that you're trying to solve. And I think we have like quite a variety of product managers from very different industries here.
No, you're spot on about that. I mean, it's a complex beast, right? Is the moral of the story, right? And you have to really look at your position and what you're building with your audience and your product and figure out what makes it easier for them. And I don't know, Ashwini, if you want to add any thoughts here even from your experience, just around how do you focus in on the customer, or if you have many possible customers, and how does that interplay show up? For small businesses or startups, they kind of have one or two, but as we have half the audience here is larger companies, they're dealing with that struggle of multiple customers.
Yeah, so I can give an example. Like over here, I recently, it's been just 5 months, I joined Humana, and I came from a startup world. I manage the pharmacy experience here at Humana for both our web and app. And as Sylvia said, like the audience is completely different. Like most of my members are 60 plus, Medicare, Medicaid member. How do you solve? What does ease of use mean to them? It being a bigger company, and I think that is a constraint with smaller companies as well, the budget is limited, right? Like even if you have this idea that you want to, create this aha moment, that delightful experience, you are constrained by your platform or your technology. Like how do you, solve for that? Making sure that you deliver something, like as product people, we want to, ship something faster, deliver value quicker. Like how do you, solve for that? I feel like that all that, constraints also make our job a little bit harder to kind of understand, or kind of to create that, ideal customer journey or customer experience. So I feel like, being more cognizant of the fact that what your constraints are, being very aware of those, and being very thoughtful around who your customer is and how, and that who kind of sometimes your overall your strategy of your company, your long-term strategy helps you, prune that list, kind of helps you focus, or helps you make those choices to kind of identify one or two kinds of like your customer personas that you want to go after. And then that makes it, that gives you the weapon, so to speak, of, choice. Do I do this or do I do that? Like those are some of the things that, come into play when you are making those choices. So even though to me, it doesn't feel like, yeah, this is the great experience, but for my customer base who want a lot of handholding, or who are not that aware or abreast with technology, like how do I make them feel comfortable that even though you are using Apple Pay, it's safe. It's safe as you calling an IVR and placing your pharmacy orders. You'll still get it. We won't charge you for something that's not being shipped. So how do you do that handholding? That kind of comes into play. For me, it's redundant, but for my customer, that's important.
Yeah, and so to your point of like that kind of B2C, and I think you just said that really thoughtfully in terms of like what I think is ease of use is not actually what my customer thinks is ease of use. Particularly, that was kind of just a great example. So sometimes we assume that like our understanding of what's true for somebody else, right? Is the net truth. It's like, oh, that's how that should work. We should just integrate with Apple Pay. Obviously, it's like, actually, maybe not. And so I think, and from a consumer standpoint, even maybe Brian, you can chime in here too. How are you seeing that interaction and that kind of the pace in terms of what they need from you as a B2C company, and in terms of the services, the quality of the experience, the adaptations or changes in the technology itself to suit their needs? Is that do you have an opinion about if that's faster paced in the B2C world than perhaps in the B2B world in terms of that customer, the response time to the customer demand and customer need?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, it's typically people like to answer that saying that, yeah, you should always react to your customer needs and constantly check what your users are up to and so on. And while that may be true, changing up your user experience too often can actually be quite confusing even. For those that enjoy your product, you do want to strike a very careful balance of reacting to, I would say, the gravity of the comments and the gravity of the feedback that you get, but not doing it so often and so radically that you can upset or confuse another type of users. And going off the back of the previous question, I would say that having that user centricity is even more so important in our customer insights team, in our business intelligence, and how we track KPI and metrics and so on, because that's how we make hypotheses to define whether we, change the UX or not. And in the B2B world, it's equally as tricky, and probably even more so, because in B2B they will do the kind of due diligence on your product that a B2C kind of like the impulsive buyer would potentially not. And you have to be even more so ticked and tied when it comes to your UX, and the functionality comes first before the aestheticness of it all.
Yeah, so it's like it has to be a functionally better product. Consumers can kind of go with the bumps a little bit easier in a sense. Maybe they might be louder about it, which has its own implications, right? But they can kind of go with the flow of it. Whereas with B2B, you have to kind of come more correct, basically, with the interaction, right? That makes a lot of sense. And in terms of, I think the all-knowing feedback loop, I think at this point, how are companies approaching, just to dovetail on that, approaching the increasing demand for real-time feedback and customer engagement, and maybe actually, Sylvia, actually, if you want to chime in on this one again, if you don't mind me double tapping you on that.
Yeah, no, this one's actually a huge one. We've seen a rise, like over the past decade, there has been a rise of various technologies, SaaS platforms, companies that help collect in-app or in-website user experience, as we recently saw with Drift accomplishing unicorn valuation, because they nailed it, right? They're a chatbot. They allow your users to give that constant feedback. I think it's interesting because every single product manager, every single company has considered doing this. And now the next question is, how do you strike a balance between not bugging your user too much with requests for feedback? I'm sure you're all familiar with all the emails that come into your inbox about, like, tell us about your experience. And in the end, like, you're numbed out. You're just not going to answer anymore. So I think it's really interesting. With B2C, you can take probably more of like a mass approach of like sending a lot of questionnaires. With B2B, because of the nature of it, you tend to interact more in person, like on calls, ask for feedback. But one thing I do have to say is there's no replacement for actual like conversations with your users. And what is really interesting is you might start surveying them about something that you think is the problem, and then they'll start talking about how your platform is actually maybe solving a different problem for them, or maybe there's another problem they have that you could be solving really easily, and ta-da, there's your next big opportunity for product growth or for expanding into a new market. So I'd say that's the first thing. And then the second thing, which is really important, is your customers will give you feedback if they trust that you are listening to them, taking notes and iterating. So I think, especially for B2B, building that trust in the agile process, and instead of like presenting a roadmap to your customer, more explain to them, we're constantly iterating. We're going to call you back in a week or two with like wireframes. You can give us your opinion again, and that's how you get them really involved in the product development process, and that's how that's how you build a relationship with them for the long term. So it all comes full circle.
And I think you're spot on about that. And I kind of want to maybe, to your point of kind of different ways in which you can kind of go through that process, but still at the end of the day, conversations are king or queen, basically, right? And they're the meaningful activity that really adds color and context to that quantitative data set that you have about your customer. And so kind of to throw a little bit of a wrench in that is this kind of confusing thing for startups and for bigger companies between the customer and the user, and kind of how do you service both. And actually, I love to thank Susan for this. If you can speak to this, for B2B or even B2C, because this affects both businesses. It also affects platform companies, marketplaces. I mean, this kind of shows up in a lot of different environments, actually. But how do you balance the needs of both the customer and the user? Do you have any thoughts on how to even approach that and prioritize that?
Yeah, I mean, part of it is going back to the basics again of understanding them. So how are they different? How are they the same? What does your customer, or in this case, what I'm assuming you mean is like the buyer, right? Whoever's purchasing your software in that case, what do they care about? What do they value? What is going to help them make the decision to purchase your software, or even get into the point of like, being willing to switch, right, from another software, which we know the cost of switching is really, really painful and high. So, understanding what motivates them, what's really driving their decision making is going to be critical for you to then be able to resonate, right, and be able to really make sure that your offering is seen as valuable. So you have to understand that buyer, along with, at the end of the day, your software. And when we're talking about that user experience of how you're interacting with the software, how you're interacting with a company, that's going to be on multiple players, and it could be very different types of people. And so you need to understand them as well, so that you're making sure that you're, again, making the impact that you need for them to be satisfied with your offering. And that experience. So, and then you just need to understand, like you have to understand too, what is that role that the buyer plays when it comes to making the decisions for those users, and then how do you figure out, okay, where is that kind of sweet spot, so that we can again present this information in a meaningful way.
And maybe this is actually kind of a grab bag question for everyone here, but do you guys have an example? So you've customer experience at the product level, but we kind of know it manifests across the organization. If that belief is there, if it's a customer-centric organization, and a lot of language around customer-centric and everyone being customer-centric, but we kind of know it when we see it. Like we kind of see it, and not just in their external experience, but also kind of their employee experience. That kind of in service of kind of idea shows up. Do you guys have any examples of companies that you think are doing it really well on the B2B or B2C side or doing customer engagement and really, really well, or customer success? Any thoughts on that?
If I may add, I would think Gong and Outreach, for those that are familiar with Gong and Outreach. So Gong is think of them as a sales intelligence tool. They help augment sales conversations and helps you analyze what went well, what didn't. And Outreach is a sequencing platform, for lack of a better way of explaining it. It's you can literally enroll leads into the system so that you can send out emails. And what I really like about their experiences is that they have a very user-centric approach, in that it's not just about delivering value and delivering experiences, but their experiences have really nice pop-ups and just general aesthetics that you can provide feedback back to the company. And you can say, hey, this feature that I'm using, it can actually do that, or I'd like this to do X, Y, Z. So they have taken, both these companies, I feel, have taken user experience from a monologue to more like a dialogue with users. And I think it was Sylvia or Susan, someone said that if you try to do this too much, it might seem intrusive, might seem annoying. That why are you asking me all these things? But yeah, having that balance, it's an art, and I think these companies have done pretty well in that regard.
So do you guys all think you're artists? Oh, go ahead. Shwini, go
I was
ahead.
going to give shout out to one of the companies like Amplitude. I don't know if you guys have ever used their product, but I'm a huge fan. It's an analytics platform that helps, and it's kind of made for product people to kind of understand the outcome of what you are building. It is so amazing that their own North Star is kind of how does their product provide value to you as a product manager to make decisions and choices that would allow your product to grow. And they have inbuilt it so nicely in the way so they are taking this active solicited feedback, but there is a lot of unsolicited feedback that they are collecting in terms of the actions that you are taking on their platform, like how many not just how many charts or how many analysis you are doing, but how does that analysis shape into the next release that you are going to do. So if you have taken one, if you have tagged something on your site and user action or an event, and then you are seeing that is that even kind of manifesting itself in how the choices you're making in terms of improving that particular experience for the user. So for example, I was at a company called Patients Like Me, and we used to use Amplitude to kind of measure how much engaged patients were on the site. And they would look at that engagement metric that we had created and would help us understand the customer behavior, or kind of predict it based on the actions that a user is taking. So it was like such a useful tool, not just kind of to look at a snapshot of how you have been doing, like just like what usually analytics is. Like you kind of, I mean, at least in the past, I've used it as a gauge of, okay, I've done this, and looking back, did I take the right choice or not? It also helps you to kind of not necessarily look into the future, but gives you tools to kind of predict, like, would this work, would that work, like how is your customer behavior, how is that journey looking like, and gives quantitative data to do that. So I really like the way they have been inculcating that feedback based on the behavior on their own tool. So that seemed like really amazing to me.
I hope they're listening somewhere on the internets right now, because that was a glowing.
It's an amazing tool. I really I'm a fangirl for that. Like it's so good.
That's so funny you said that, because I put in the chat how I asked if anyone else has a fan crush on John Cutler.
Yeah.
So if you people don't follow him, please follow him, because he's got really just such great thinking around how to build great products.
I want to dig into this little art question, because I think it spoke to me, because I think we kind of forget that product is really a craft. Like it is an art and science relationship. It should be honored as such, and I think in that way, can you talk a little bit about how you balance, or even how you intuit that art and science blend? That art and science blend, like how, because that intuition, that gut assumption, which we see a lot in design work, right, in the product side, the creative side, is showing up here. And can you just talk about maybe even your internal process, or how do you kind of think about, you get a scenario, you're trying to solve a problem, how are you deploying the art and science in your work? How do you think about that? That might be a super meta question, as you can tell me how what you think about that. Anyone can jump in, feel free if feel moved.
Yeah, so I think it really, so this is one of the questions where if you're doing B2B or B2C, it really matters. Because when you're servicing B2B, like there's a series of functionalities that you have to keep in mind. Like let's say like you're a health tech platform, you have to be HIPAA compliant, and maybe you have a limited amount of resources, and then you invest more in like the science and complying with the regulations and actually creating a beautiful user experience. But obviously like that would be very different if you're, I don't know, working for Facebook, for example. I think I think this really does go back to like being connected to your product and to the whole, like impersonating the user, like with your mindset. Because I think the reality for a lot of us product managers, like, you know, there's investors, there's stakeholders, there's management, like having certain opinions. I think almost everybody I've spoken to can agree that you often can't take the time to integrate like that beautiful, like that artsy portion of product. And very often when you're working in tech, it's much more about being practical and functional. So I'd be curious if anybody else feels like they can integrate more of that artistic, like color, like focus more on that user experience portion.
Yeah, I could share. We're doing something. Well, in my last company, we did something pretty radical where we tasked our UX designers to get into pairs, like a buddy system with personas that we were selling to that were existing in the organization. So my prior company was Microsoft. So say we're building a product or a service for healthcare providers, right? We would tie up a UX designer with a salesperson selling into healthcare and be like, okay, let's design this together. And while it might seem like it's a little bit of an extra ask, like, well, you know, they don't get design or he doesn't, she doesn't, so on. What we realize is that more so than the product, our UX team gains so much valuable insight by opening up design methodologies to non-designers and seeing how they react to things. So yeah, and you know, it's been doing well ever since. That's what I hear. So that's an
Yeah,
example.
and I would build on that even more than just see how they react to things, but also have them be input into, you know, design direction or just like how they're. I mean, the idea is really when you think about like a design thinking approach. Part of that is, of course, the empathy, understanding the customer. But then when you take those insights and you synthesize that, you still have to make something of that, right? You actually have to do something with all that customer understanding. And so when you get into that design process and you're trying to determine like what can you actually, what are some possible solutions now that we understand these customer pain points, it's really a best practice to take a divergent approach initially. And so, you know, so go big, go think about these things in a lot of different ideas. And to get to divergent thinking, you need like diversity of people, experiences, roles, you know, all of those things can help create new ideas that are again, widely divergent from what you would have done if you were kind of alone at your desk in Figma. So that allows you to say like, okay, great. Now we've got all these different ideas that could possibly solve these problems. How do we like narrow those down, get to some convergence? And sometimes that's where maybe some quantitative data can help. Or you go back to understand, you know, what have you kind of synthesized from the customer's perspective to help you narrow all those ideas to say, oh, you know, as Shwini mentioned about prioritization and focus. Okay, well, you can't apply all these great big ideas. So let's take that focus and let's narrow down because we have a better understanding of our target audience and how that is aligned to our business strategy as well, right? So this is where the business wants to head. This is our understanding of the customers, our knowledge. We've got all these great ideas. Let's narrow those down so that we're kind of working in the right direction. So then we can go back and say, oh, okay, back to the customer again and get some feedback. And then you're iterating through your way to the point in which you're now at some point delivering on that feature, capability, product, whatever level you're doing. So that is all art and science, right?
I actually just thought of a really good example from some work we did recently. So we work in the maritime commerce industry where most of our users, like our overwhelming majority of our users are male. And it just so happens that 12% of men are colorblind. So in that case, we realized our color scheme was not colorblind friendly and prioritized the redesign of the colors across like a whole product area. And that's a really good example of marrying like science with colors. So that was, and you know, doing something good for users, even though they don't tell you they're colorblind. Like it's, we have enough science and data to know that.
It's like if you love helping people, I feel like 20 years ago they would tell you to become a nurse. Now it's like become a product person. If you want to help people in that that feel-good feeling. I mean, it really is there, right? It's being able to crack a code on something, because the reality is technology is becoming our immersive experience, right? And those things, those what were micro frustrations now can become really big issues. Really quick funny story. I was leaving my apartment the other day, going through the garage, and the garage door in the building was slowly not opening. I'm like, I'm going to be stuck. Like, I'm going to, and it's a very small technical challenge, but you start to realize how many things are automated around you. And when they break, the impact it can actually have. And so all of a sudden, product becomes really important, and understanding the user experience becomes really, it's real in your experience. It's not just this little thing of annoying a slow load time. All of a sudden, it becomes much more meaningful than that, right? And I think that's where we are in this moment. It's kind of a good reminder. And so you guys are all like pros at what you do. And so I'm moonlighting, but you guys are really the pros here. And so what I'd love to kind of understand is, how do you keep up, with the pace that's required to understand and maintain relationship with the customer? And, what should a product person or company be thinking about today in order to maintain or continue to create a great experience? And that one I can actually throw out to Susan, or anyone else who wants to chime in as well.
Maybe somebody else wants to jump in and I'll build on that.
Sure. Yeah, so I think what is really interesting to keep in mind is that what our users perceive as their user experience is based on every other product that they've interacted with up to coming to your website or using your product. So if people have been on Airbnb, Uber, have used Microsoft products, whatever, they come to Vest and Nautical or Grammarly, they expect the workflow to somehow relate. You want to simplify it for them, because if there are some elements that recall something they just learned, all of a sudden their brain power is freed up to learn more about your product and to learn something new. And that's why, when you go to a restaurant website, right, the reservation experience is almost always the same, because the restaurant industry knows that. And same for a lot of other industries. Think of how Uber and Lyft. You wouldn't want to have to switch from Uber to Lyft and relearn the whole thing. Just get confused. So I think that, so I think that's the first thing, being mindful of the environment and the world around you that you're building your product in. And then the second thing is, again, always relating it back to your own personal experience using products, what made that great experience. But then the other thing is, as product people, and we do have a UX expert here, I think it's really important to rely on great UX designers, because it's their job to spend their days doing that research, reading up on the latest market trends, and it really takes a village, right? You absorb the collective experience of the team and you come up with something great together.
Yeah, no, that's spot on. I don't know if anyone wants to add in there, but I think you said something very poignant around understanding your environment, because for the startups in the room, the conversation is build something new, be super unique, right? And all of a sudden you kind of go off script with how you're building or how you're setting the business up, because you need it to be unique in all these different ways. But it's really, there's a dissonance for the customer who's like, wait, what is this thing? I thought I knew how this thing worked and now I don't. And that's right, that's jarring, right? So I think that was a really kind of great point that you made. Someone want to add in on that question?
Yeah, so just finding those common patterns, that's what it sounds like you're talking about. So full transparency, I missed the question because I was still thinking about the previous question. And I was like, what is that thing I'm trying to think of? So what I was trying to remember was, if you all remember how many years ago it was, but in Hawaii, they had this ballistic missile alert situation, and everyone on the island, they were just, it's very scary to get that kind of alert. And so I was still thinking about that. I'm like, what was that example? Oh yeah, it was this whole notion of is it user error that somebody actually sent that out? Or was it that we didn't design to prevent a really big mistake? So just thinking about all the complexities of design, right? It's just so fascinating when you think about it. So yes, there's patterns you need to build that you want to rely on because they're very well understood already. So why reinvent the wheel on a pattern that's understood? Hey, you can go innovate in a different area. And then when it comes to, hey, if it matters, what are the things that matter that you want to prevent errors? Make sure that you're creating some extra hurdles maybe in those cases, so that you're not making it too easy to make a really big mistake that impacts so many people. So there's like a lot of factors in design. So sorry about the not paying attention though earlier.
That's actually a great example. I don't know if I want to add to that. That's a great example because, yeah, go ahead.
No, sorry. I was just going to say that, adding to what both Susan and Sylvia said, like being aware, like that dissonance piece that you mentioned, and also from a UX piece, like understanding all these, not necessarily like edge cases and use cases. I feel like one of the things, like especially as we are designing our product, is kind of thinking of our customer not in isolation of our own product, because they don't they don't give that much of a thought to our product, right? Like we get paid for it and we live and breathe it, but that's not their job. Like, but it exists to do something like I like that whole jobs to be done kind of a piece. Like we exist to solve a particular problem, but that's not the only problem. Even if it was, if for in my case, like Humana Pharmacy, for example, they are doing the pharmacy transactions on Humana, but their insurance is Humana. So their interactions with Humana is just not on the pharmacy side, it's on the insurance side as well. And then they have to, if they're specialty members who need to get like these medications that need to be administered by a doctor or a nurse, that also comes into play. So there are like lots of different pieces that kind of make that experience, not just your product might be just a cog in the wheel. So you need to understand that wheel, that that bigger, broader opportunity that exists. Like what is it? What is that customer's context? And then use that to design your solution. Maybe it is something that helps, like they have completed a workflow somewhere else, and this is going to help them do maybe a next stage or something asynchronously later. But how do you stitch that, or how do you remember that, or how do you honor that? Like that needs to be built in when you are thinking about creating your product.
Yeah, I know 100%. I think that, okay, I'm just listening. I'm like listening because I forget that I'm moderating the panel. So we go in from there, and maybe we have about 10 to 15 minutes left. So folks, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A so we can start taking questions in. Of course, I can have this group forever, so I have tons of questions, but feel free to ask and we will make sure to get to those as well. And so I wanted to throw out a question to Brian, because we have this B2B and B2C kind of conversation going during this discussion. And I wanted to kind of get your thoughts around, B2B and B2C marketing. And do you think it's shifted just due to the increase in user experience in terms of, are they becoming more similar now, B2B and B2C versus before, or are there still ways in which they are fundamentally kind of different beasts? I'm just getting thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, the one word that comes to mind to describe how it's changed is it's probably simplified for the better. Mm-hmm. And when we think of B2C, I think simplicity was always part of the equation when you market to certain types of users. Even when you do research, right? I mean, if at all you feel you have good product market fit, B2C or B2B, but you're not seeing the kind of revenue gains or adoption or usage you're hoping for, you either think like, did I ask the wrong person at the wrong time? Did I ask the right person at the wrong time, or did I ask the right person at the you try to figure out the permutations and combinations of like, did I just engage the wrong user when I was developing the product? And that, unfortunately, you can never be 100% right. You hope that your hypothesis has the right assumptions all ticked and tied, that you're going down the right path. So for marketers, I've sat on both sides of the aisle. I started my career as a product manager at Microsoft, then moved into product marketing, and just been bouncing around this product ecosystem in a way. And I've seen that more product managers now understand product marketing, and more product marketing managers understand product managers, because of the reason that, whether you're B2C or B2B, your user experience is the test of all your assumptions, of all the hypotheses you've put out there. And so user experience is now, as I said before, I think, it's become less of a monologue where you're like, hey, we think you like this, so here you go, try it out. And there's a lot of dialogue that's come into the equation because of that. And so from a marketing standpoint, also, when you think of positioning and messaging and what value aspects of your product are you putting out there in one geo versus another, where you talk about other things, and you're constantly A/B testing, constantly trying to see if the product is matching up with the message in itself. So on the B2C side, yeah, I mean, as I said, it's been simplified. On the B2B side, we are definitely seeing a lot of simplification because your marketing is sometimes seen as the reflection of your product. And if your marketing comes across as confusing, or I usually tell my team that don't have more than 3 value drivers, more than 3, and I'm confused. And sometimes from a product side, we're like, hey, we have all these other things. Why aren't we talking about that? I'm like, well, you got to kind of figure it out. You got to streamline and simplify things. So on the B2B side, yes, we are starting to see that, and user experience is a great way to test and learn and see how your messaging is landing.
No, and does anyone else here have that kind of experience have maybe worked on B2C and B2B, or kind of had that similar experience? Want to chime in there? Okay, we can go on.
I have experience for both, but not necessarily on the marketing side, I would say. But yeah, I mean, I like what Brian had stated in terms of testing that out, getting that feedback, making sure your messaging and the value statements match up. And then also I also kind of wonder about the part you were talking about product market fit. How do you know you have product market fit? Right. So maybe you need to test those assumptions that you have product market fit. If you're not getting, as you mentioned, the adoption, the usage, right? Like all those metrics that you would expect. So there's some more testing that you can do there as well.
Do you guys think of product development or product management not as a means to an end, or not something that has a fixed and finite goal, but really the process of managing the user and the customer, and that is really this loving hamster wheel of experience? Do you guys have an opinion on it? Because I think people struggle sometimes, even with lean as an idea as it came into the world, of like, we never finish this though, like we never, do you feel like that's showing up in product too, that experience of we just shift from there's a goal and we're done to this is kind of a forever thing with the customer?
Yeah, I think the thing that a lot of people don't keep in mind when they think of accomplishing product market fit is that it's a product market fit for now. So think of MySpace. They definitely had product market fit until like MSN, and then Facebook came, and then they no longer had it. How did that happen? Like, how did they lose that? Same with a lot of companies, really. Like, think of how IBM lost market share. Think of how the traditional automakers lost market share to Tesla and the new innovative ones. And it's weird because when you're a startup, so first, for the purposes of Startup Boston, it's all about accomplishing that product market fit. And then you think I made it, but absolutely not. And that's what companies more in a higher growth stage like Fast and Nautical, or probably Grammarly and others on this panel know that no, we constantly have to innovate to stay competitive. You only have product market fit until you don't have it. And you don't know when you're about to lose it, I guess.
Actually, yeah. Can we talk a little bit? You don't know when you're about to lose it. That's the deep statement. Is that do we panel? Is that yeah, that's true? Or actually, is it there's some way to get some visibility into that, or is there ways to shield against that? Or even to your point, maybe it's not a full drop off, but you've kind of lost the match that you had. You want to speak on that?
Well, I think that people need to more folks need to understand that product market fit isn't a binary result. It's a spectrum, right? And you sometimes have more product market fit than others. And now what defines more could be metrics, could be a gut instinct, could be a competitor probably trying out one of the messaging that you were going to try and you didn't, and now they've won. It could be many other things. But at the end of the day, product market fit is really I would say it's less about hey, are you tracking the right metrics and stuff? And it's more about what was your product intended to do in the first place, and has anything changed with the product and the market has remained, stagnant, or the market has changed and your product has remained stagnant. And so kind of it's an equation that you need to figure out, which is why I'm of the belief that you never really have 100 product market fit or whatever. You're somewhere along that spectrum, and you need to decide for your company where do you want to be in the phase that your business is, in the phase that your product is. Where do you want to be?
You guys are dropping gems you don't even know in this conversation, because I think that's really that the language is get to product market fit, right? Like that's the language that's used, as if it's like this one moment it happens and everyone is confetti and you're like I'm going to raise $1 billion, we're good. And it's like that's not the case, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it is the first time, right? Don't you think it is exciting that first time? Yes, that's like when you're in a startup and you're building something. That is the first. It's like, think of it as a milestone more than anything else, right? It's a milestone in your journey. It's not the end, like destination.
Yeah. Do you think there's something to the idea of like losing product market fit, or even the spectrum of kind of going up and down? Do you think that's due to like the system and structure is working, we just kind of lost, didn't have our eye on the ball in the right way? Or is there actually a different activity that needs to happen to ensure that you maintain product market fit? Like it's not part of the regular cycle of work in product development, or are they actually just get better at the product development and then that issue reduces?
I would say read Crossing the Chasm. That is my recommendation here. No, I mean, there's a lot written about this, and a lot of brilliant minds who have been following, a lot of big organizations and small ones, right? Startups, and how they succeed and how larger ones have failed. And there's just so much to unpack in that question. So like the easy answer is Crossing the Chasm.
Got it. I just want to add to that, because I mean, that fear is always looming, to your point of, and it's a question of like, do you have a strong product management practice within the organization, right? Because if you have a strong practice, then you can kind of go back to those core things to realign the company, realign the experience in the product. If you don't have a strong practice, then things start, like a car, just kind of things start falling off basically, right? As you go faster and faster, the wheels start to shake a little bit. So is that kind of the experience when kind of growing a company and trying to maintain product market fit for folks who've been through the journey of that on the startup side?
Well, it's important to identify what your levers are earlier on, because say down the line you start scaling and you start doing well and scaling even more, and when it comes down to reorganizing your team, or it could be updating your product, like giving it a full overhaul and whatnot. It's important to identify like what are the levers of your business model, what are the levers of your product, so to speak. And so what that helps with is that, one, you don't look back and be like, I don't know how we got here, but we somehow got here. Now we need to figure this out all over again. And number two, you have you have a good handle on your business, right? And I mean, it's sometimes taken as like, business school jargon and all that, but there is some value in understanding what your levers are, so that you have rooted your company well in the beginning years, so that in the future you can actually have control over it and even manage change in it much better. Yeah.
And I love what you said there, because what you all are talking about here is that, good product leaders are also good business leaders. Like there's this intersection of both conversations that show up in product. And for the folks here who are earlier in their careers, I think particularly for talking to the Gen Z and millennial community who really want to be part of the conversation within the company about how it's working and how it's building, I think what you're learning here today is some great language on how to make strong business cases for improvements you want inside the organization, that you can understand how the leadership thinks about the work and that interconnection between the business side and the product side. So I think that this is just great for kind of that insight as well. I have one or two more questions before we close out here. If anyone has any questions, please put them in the Q&A and then, or even in the chat, and then we'll answer them. And so this was really a question about kind of the buying journey. And so today, when you think about the key factors, this could be human behavior, it could be, I don't know, regulations for specific industries, it could be kind of integrations, the tools that you use related to the buying journey. How does that differ from a B2C to a B2B perspective? And again, are there just specific considerations for the B2B folks versus the B2C folks they can take away as, things you should be considering uniquely to them in this in the product space?
Yeah, so I think this kind of goes back to what I was saying about, like, in B2B, you have to be practical and like mind regulations, and make sure that like you are offering the types of integration and technologies that are key for your customers, so the business's success. Versus in B2C, it's more about delighting the customer, creating that ease of use. Like an example of like a key factor in the purchase of a B2B SaaS product could be like, hey, do you offer an API to connect with like our other vendors, or just things like, are you compliant with a certain, like, are you compliant with a set of regulations, as I was saying with HIPAA? And that probably means, like, given that we all have a certain amount of resources, like, you'll have to eventually compromise on something else.
Gotcha. So I have 2 rapid fire questions. Everyone will answer it as quickly as possible to close out the session. The first is, what can product teams do to increase their ability to provide a great user experience? So any best practice that you'd like to share that they could do, increase customer experience. I can start with Susan.
Sure. So I'll go back to that kind of team sport thinking. So, really being able to get those divergent ideas, and obviously, again, based on first your customer, that shared understanding. So, tap on the salesperson's shoulder, go talk to customer success, get the insights of, from feedback from various voice of the customer programs, bring that in as part of how you formulate your strategy. So.
Great. Ashwini, do you want to share a best practice?
Yeah, I actually want to tag team with Susan over here. Talk with the customer, like make it a habit. Like you have to get out there and talk to de-risk your assumptions. And that's the best place to learn how people use your product and what the opportunities are.
Gotcha. Brian?
I just say, don't build for perfection, build for learning. So that'll bring the humility in you to learn and not have an emotional attachment to whatever you've built.
So again, yes. And then Sylvia, best practice?
I think it comes down to making sure that your customer trusts you, in that, like, that you have their best interests like in mind when designing a product. So building that trust. So going back to what everybody else is saying about talking to the customers, building that human relationship, and having them want to reach out to you and talk to you.
Awesome. And in true Boston fashion, we're going to go right to the wire, exactly on time, like the scientists that we are in Boston. So the last question, rapid fire. The biggest opportunity and the biggest challenge in product today. I'm going to start off with Ashwini.
Oh, I feel like time. I always struggle with time. There is a lot to do and very little time to accomplish it. I feel like you need to always be aware of what's happening outside, what's happening with your product. There are too many things, too many balls in the air. I feel like sometimes you have to give yourself grace and kind of take a break and go back and attack it. I feel like you need to kind of create a safe space for you to kind of go and build and re-energize and go back to the drawing board.
We go with Susan. Biggest opportunity, biggest challenge?
Sure. So biggest opportunity is to really understand what's going to drive the most impact for customers. Biggest challenge is really figuring out this balance of autonomy and alignment, since we have so many decentralized teams.
Awesome. Sylvia, opportunity challenge?
Yeah, so I think the biggest opportunity 10 years ago, you told someone I work in product, people were like, product what? Nowadays, I feel like, at least in the SaaS world, everybody knows what product was. And that means like people understand and like look up to product to drive change. So that's a massive opportunity. Challenges, I think the same, right? Like it's the opportunity and the challenge. Going back to what Ashwini is saying, like, oh great, I have to prioritize. And brutally prioritize between talking to engineering, talking to sales, talking to my customers. So yeah, I think you can't be a good product manager if you don't learn that brutal prioritization. That's a challenge.
And Brian, because I'm not going to be rude here, do you have a one-liner on opportunity? He's like, no.
my opportunity and challenge is trying to talk to as many people as possible to learn what to build, but then you have to narrow it down, and that's the opportunity there too.
Awesome. Thank you everyone for listening. You can find all of these amazing people on LinkedIn to reach out if you have questions. And thank you so much, and enjoy Startup Boston Week. Bye everyone.
Thank you all so much. Talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Bye.
For some reason, you have to show me how to go to